Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of Hands Across the Water, the Beatles and Solo podcast. As we say here, nothing is off the table. I am joined by my two lovely co-hosts from the Two Legs podcast, and now Hands Across the Water, Andy Nichols.
Hi, Kyle. How you doing, man? Good to see you.
Same here. And of course, the world's famous Lennon Estate favorite, Beatle Tone. Tony, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Carl. How are you?
Excellent. Happy to be here. So tonight we are doing a very special program called The Battle of 1971. Soon we will each be assigned randomly a Beatle that released a landmark album in 1971, and we will have to plead their case as to why they had the best year out of all their former bandmates. But before we do that, some housekeeping. Remember, new podcast here. We want to make sure that you stay in the know, stay up to date on everything we do, whether it's a new show or a live show or what have you. Please subscribe, or even better, when you watch the show, let us know your thoughts. Leave a comment below. We all have a great time responding, interacting with all of your comments. This podcast will also appear on Spotify in video and audio form, so make sure to check out that if that's your preferred platform. And lastly, I personally have to make sure I plug our world famous Instagram. We post clips from the show. Sometimes I'll ask questions and engage with the commenters, but something a little different that happens there that we don't do on here is I have so much fun posting archival clips of Beatles, solo Beatles. So if you're into that sort of thing, if you're on Instagram, give us a follow, Hands Across the Water pod. So now for today's show. At this point in the broadcast, the three of us are wearing the Beatles merchandise. See, for the audio listeners, we got Tony's got one from All Generations of the Beatles. I've got a little Yellow Submarine one. Andy's got a Hard Day's Night one. So soon enough, we will magically change outfits to represent our Beatle of the show. So as a quick reminder, I'm sure this is not news to all of you, but in the year 1971, obviously, it's a big year, hot off the Beatles breakup. All of them are trying to prove that they still got it, that they're still on top of the world. And Paul released the world famous album Ram. John released the album Imagine. And George made the landmark bash nonprofit charity concert for Bangladesh. Each one of us is going to represent one of them and plead their case as to why they had the best year. And of course, we're going to do this through luck, random draw. And Tony, the Vanna White of our podcast, please show us who each of us have.
So in my hand here, I've got 3 Beatles names, John, Paul, and George. And here in this hand, I've got 3 podcasters' names, Andy, Carl, and Tone. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick. I'm going to randomly pick one name of us and one name of a Beatle, and that is who each. So each of us will represent each Beatle in a debate, I suppose you could call it. So I'm just mixing it up. I'm going to throw them down there, and the first one I'm going to pick up is George. Can you see that? Who is going to get George?
Drum roll, please. And the winner is, representing Concert for Bangladesh,
it's Andy.
Oh,
Andy Nichols. Andy, all right, let's pause there. Andy, okay. How do you feel about this pick?
This is going to be tough.
Where does Concert for Bangladesh rank in your love of George's discography first?
Compared to Ram and Imagine? Not that high.
Okay, so you think you're the
dark horse?
You're the dark horse.
I'm the dark horse.
Yeah, but the first ever charity concert with that massive lineup.
They put
together. It's fairly important, right?
It certainly
Beatle
is.
number 2, Paul
McCartney.
Okay.
Podcaster number 2.
Podcast number 2, representing
Yeah.
Ram.
Mr. Hand.
All right.
All right.
Right.
I will take it.
So
just
Kyle,
to prove that it's all above board, and the last one is John. So
Tony's got John.
Right.
Kyle's got Paul.
Okay,
and I've got George.
So
All
that's
right.
it. So right, and we'll get on with our little debate. After 3 boys, 1, 2,
3.
Boom.
I never really was known for my rhythm. So welcome back to the future, Hands Across the Water. We all have made our miraculous costume changes. We're all geared up and well-trained to defend our Beatle. And so as a reminder of what you just heard 12 seconds ago, in this corner, we have Andrew Nichols defending George Harrison. We have Beatle Tone representing John Lennon, and myself, Kyle Hand on the Run, representing Paul McCartney's Ram. So let's start with just a broad overview of the year 1971. Of course, this is very shortly after the Beatles' big breakup. They're all trying to chart their own courses, find their own identities, musical and personal, and we got some great music to come out of it. So we'll start off with the order that Tony drew things, with Andy Nichols defending George Harrison.
Not so much defending, more attacking on behalf of.
Yes, personal attacks are allowed. This might get a little dirty.
Oh boy. Well, thank you, Kyle. And obviously we've recorded this a little bit differently. You're watching this in one episode, but we've had a couple of days to think on it since that intro that we recorded. And initially, when I drew George Harrison, I was a little bit, I don't know, but I feel really prepared now to defend why George wins 1971. And 1971 is a really, really important year in the 10 years between 70 and 80. Lot going on in this year. This is the 1971, 72 is like the height of like the distance and the disconnect between all 4 Beatles. You've at the end of 1970, actually the last day of 1970, Paul issues the writ to sue all the Beatles. The trial to get out of the Beatles starts in early 1971. So this year, and what all 3 Beatles, for our argument's sake for this episode, was really, really the high point of their disconnect for that entire year. And arguments can be made for all 3 camps, but really when you think about George coming off the back end of All Things Must Pass, which came out in November of 1970, I mean, with a triple album, a third one was a jam, he was able to just coast and ride the wave of that success throughout the year. And he did. He didn't need to do another proper studio album after a triple album. There's that famous quote of John saying, what's he, Quackers putting 3 records out? So their reaction to what they were doing, and George being the very much junior member, and say his first true musical statement after the breakup of the group is a triple album. He's like, here you go, fellas. I've been sitting on this stuff for years. Here's my music. Here's my first musical statement. Good luck with that. So there is a strong case to be made for George to have that success commercially and critically too. Especially, Paul was not gaining that favor in 1971. John, we know, was the traditional rock journalism media darling, especially in 1971. But John and George definitely had favor over Paul in this regard. And this is before we even get to the concert of Bangladesh. The strength of All Things Must Pass can ride George through most of that year. And also, by the way, host the first ever charity benefit concert that was ever done before. But more on that later. But yeah, 1971, just where all 3 Beatles were at. This is the height of that stuff. And I think George comes out of the gate really knocking a grand slam out of the park with All Things Must Pass. And it's catch-up time from that point on for John, who I don't think John was jealous, but he also couldn't give a shit. And Paul was probably just like, wow, George has really done something pretty magical here. So that's where 1971 leads off for George, starting the year off like on a high, on a total high. And he has My Sweet Lord comes out as a single on the 15th of January, the beginning of the year. He drops one of his best-selling songs of all time, the one that he's probably known best for as a solo artist. So George, I think, wins 1971 right out of the gate to start the year, in my opinion.
And you know, it's all right for John to say, is he crackers? But the reason why he's got a triple album is because John and Paul never let him get a song on an album. So he's got this great big stack of songs that he's got to get out of his system.
You take a song like The Art of Dying, which goes back as far as Revolver in 1966.
Yeah, Isn't It a Pity as well, I think, came from that era as well.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So Now All Things Must Pass is a 1970 release, but it was everywhere in 1971, and it really gave George a lot of credit. Appearances on Dick Cavett, and I think that you could really make an argument that the success of All Things Must Pass is what led for Bangladesh to really happen, because his profile was so high that he was able to put that concert together a mere 7 or 8 months later.
Wow, that's a really good point. I think I was ready to come and attack you and say, okay, so George did nothing. That's your argument. But I kind of think that your point is taken, that he didn't need to do anything, because like that one album was not a blip on the radar and then disappeared. That one album was so big, so monumental, so impactful that it did last him a whole other year and then led into the success of this big charity concert.
Absolutely, Kyle. And context is everything. We're talking about right after the Beatles breaking up, and a junior member of the Beatles releases a triple album. That's a big, big time musical statement. It's hard with 50 plus years hindsight to look at it, especially through the eyes of a 26-year-old guy, to say, oh, it's just an album. No, that's a musical statement, 2 hands down, being like, look, this is my statement. And I've got here's a great little quick review. Tony, you remember Richard Williams from the Times, the music critic?
Yeah.
Here's a quote from a review of the album, okay? He says, of all the Beatles solo albums to date, George Harrison's All Things Must Pass makes far and away the best listening, perhaps because it's the one which most nearly continues the tradition they began 8 years ago. Harrison's light has been hidden under the egos of McCartney and Lennon, but from time to time, there have been hints on several of their albums that he was more than he was being allowed to be. There you go.
Very true. Very true.
So
yeah, I really like how you're bringing up like the context of that time, because if I can just try and like put it back in today's context, right? Like when I get into an older album, it's like I go through my season with it, I enjoy it, whatever. But when a huge artist, whether it's artists that we particularly are not fond of, but just not interested in, whether it's like Taylor Swift or Beyonce or Kendrick Lamar, like a big name, that's not just like something on the radio for a week, like that stays in the public eye, the public ear, if you will,
sure,
for a long time, sometimes a year. And I can only imagine that, like you said, when the junior Beatle makes his big breakout album, that's not contained to the calendar year 1970.
No, it's not. That ripple effect goes on for a long time, and you can even almost say that because of that, the success of that record, George doesn't put out a proper album until the middle of 73. He didn't have to pump out album after album after album after this triple album, and it's the staying power is incredible still.
So the last thing I'll say before we move on is that another good modern day example is Beatle Tone's anthology video. That did so well that he got to enjoy the success of that for a little bit. He didn't have to release a video the very next week. It's the same thing.
I didn't want to kill it, but yeah, I mean, but the thing is that with All Things Must Pass, is it came out the end of 1970, so it was really an album for 1971. They were still in the studio recording it in October 1970. So All Things Must Pass. So it's an album for 71.
It is,
and it's hard to get past it.
It certainly is, and I think people just take it for granted now because it's All Things Must Pass. But it is such a powerful first true musical statement for somebody who was a second-class member of the group. So yeah, that's my kickoff point for George in 71.
Okay, so my overview historical introduction to my argument here is kind of piggybacking off of Andy's. You mentioned that John is the darling for the record reviewers. George is, the new thing in town, and Paul is chop liver. He's the overdog that's now the underdog, and he obviously is on the opposing side of the Beatles breakup. He's seen as the provocateur, the one that broke them up, that it's just a whole mess in, the eyes of the press, in the eyes of the public. And so what does he do in this time? He tries to disappear. He tries to fade into the background. He doesn't work with any of the other Beatles. He spends the most time in Scotland than any other year. So that's kind of what Paul is going through at the time. That in the Sirius XM Ram interview that he did for Ram's 50th, he said he was tired of hiring somebody to do this, hiring somebody to do that. That if he wants a table, he'll just make it. And so this is kind of his home period where, Mary is an infant, Stella is born. He's just, enjoying home life. He's enjoying domesticality. And at the same time, he's going to New York where he doesn't really know anybody, and he's not asking for the top class musicians. He's just hosting auditions in a Bronx basement. So Paul is really trying to find himself, find his confidence, his musical confidence again. And not to mention, this is not just after the breakup of the Beatles and how all these things are coming to life, of how he's this bully that, not letting George have songs, all this, the public perception of him. But also, this is off of the heels of the McCartney album, which nowadays, like many of his albums that were initially critically panned, is widely celebrated as a breakthrough lo-fi album with one of his biggest hits that when he, 100 years from now, Maybe I'm Amazed will be one of his main songs. And yet, by and large, it's panned. Yeah. And, I love that other quote that he has of, okay, so they thought that the McCartney album was too lo-fi, so I went in the studio. Then they thought that that Ram was too produced, so I went back, to the lo-fi. Like, the guy just can't catch a break. So that's what's going through Paul's mind, just stepping away from the public, away from the legal battles, away from the Beatles, towards his family, towards something new. And because he gained that confidence back, thanks to Linda, from the McCartney album, he's now building on that foundation to make one of the greatest albums of all time. Ram. Thoughts?
I agree. It's a solid case to make for Paul and Ram, because the security blanket that was his family is what he needed. It's what he lived. It's what he needed. He had to shut the world off. You made a good point that the other Beatles all kind of worked together. They used a lot of the same studio musicians, and Paul just totally just removed himself from that entire situation and locked in with his family to just compose music however he wanted to do it. As we were talking the other day, a lot of these songs were all, written and recorded in Scotland and at the end of 1970. So as he says on Wingspan, McCartney was a homespun affair. I'm trying to make Ram a little more professional. They hated my first album. I'm going to try to make it a little more polished going into it. And they didn't like that either. I mean, I know Tony wasn't into the Beatles yet in 1971, but do you have any memory at that point of like what Paul McCartney was like perceived in the UK as a second generation fan? And in this time, if you remember?
Not really, but I can remember having read reviews of Ram retrospectively, and then hearing the album for the first time around 76 or 77, not being overwhelmed with it, because I suppose my expectation was low, and it came later that I thought, well, this is an outstanding album, but originally I don't really have that feeling of how the media felt about Paul at the time, other than things that I've read retrospectively. But what the reviews that I'd read of it before I'd heard it, made my own expectations lower for it when I eventually got it.
Right. And it's a case in point with reviews in terms of critical and commercial appeal. Beatle fans who bought that album in 1971, for the most part, loved that record from the minute they bought it. They didn't care that it was a negative review about it. They recognized that album as a great album from the minute that they heard it. And I can use my dad's case in point. He bought that album when it came out in 1971 and was like, this album kicks ass. He didn't read any reviews. He didn't give a crap about any of that stuff. He was like, this album's great. And I think a lot of first generation fans who loved McCartney's music felt the same way. They didn't need to read a review in the NME or a very pro Lennon at that point, Rolling Stone, which we know killed, they just destroyed the album. They called Ram was the nadir of rock music. It was John Landau. I mean, and that really, it was so easy to attack Paul in these early post breakup days, especially since he was the one that initiated the lawsuit. And without the context of history and time, it's just so immediate to look back and say, okay, Paul's filed this. We've only got a couple of channels to learn about this Beatles information, news, whatever. And it's very easy to look at Paul and say, he's the villain. He's the villain and he's the bad guy. And what is this crap? He's got his wife on this album. What's this kind of homespun Ram thing? Like, what is he making? Like, what is this crap? And that's what, because people are expecting Golden Slumbers and The Long and Winding Road and Let It Be. And he's putting out these organic, pretty much homespun affair albums like we talked about on the Era show. That's what this period is. And they're like, what is this? Like, this is the guy that wrote, Hey Jude. What is this crap? Which was wrong.
I was just going to say, even Ringo, commented that it was, it's a bit silly, and he can do much better than this sort of thing when he first heard Ram. So it wasn't just the press, the anti-McCartney press. Ringo, even through the arguments and the court cases and stuff like that, Ringo tried to stay fairly neutral, I think.
Right.
He tried to, but that is a very telling comment. Even Ringo was taking the piss out of Ram too.
I think that's just an indicator, though, that it was so different than things that were happening at that time, and especially in Paul's own discography. Like, think about it. It goes Sgt. Pepper, White Album, Abbey Road, Let It Be, McCartney aside, and then Ram. Like, it's just it feels like there's this like buildup of like this continuity of ideas building on ideas, maybe zig and zag a little bit. Obviously Let It Be is recorded before Abbey Road, but it feels like this crescendo that just all climaxes with the Abbey Road medley that, we talked about last week, how all of us love so much. But then McCartney and then Ram, it doesn't feel like the through line is there, which I understand why critics were like, what the hell is this?
Mm-hmm.
But now looking back at his whole discography, I'm going to save some of those points for later when I'm, really digging the knife into you guys.
It feels like a little bit of a scrapbook of ideas, Ram, a bit of a mismatch of, a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other. Some songs very basic, some songs very produced, and stuff like that. And I think it took a bit of time for it all to feel like a proper album. But it does feel like a proper album now. But I think it might have taken a little bit of time because you've got this, this song where he, Ram on where he's playing the ukulele, and the song where he's got a 40-piece orchestra on it. I think it took a little bit of time for it to settle down. I think maybe.
Well, what's interesting, and this might be a good transition to you, Tony. I think that what makes this conversation gives so much for us to just dig into is that All Things Must Pass, Imagine, and Ram are all such three different albums. Right? I mean, maybe Ram is like a little bit further away from those two, but I still think like just the whole approach, the recording was so different, from three guys that have been in the same band for the past decade.
I think for John, it was a little bit of a different move. I mean, and you can speak to this, Tony, because you drew this album.
1971 for John. a very different year, different little phases to it. He's in England. He's making his Imagine. He's also making hit singles as well, which I'm going to come to. That's going to be my first talking point. I'm not going to play the Imagine card straight away. I'm going in gently. But very different year for him. They recorded Imagine in England at Ascot at his home studio, which is called. Which I didn't realize this. It's called Ascot Sound Studios or AS Studio.
Yes.
AS Studio. So they record it. He's got musician Phil Spector is producing with John and Yoko co-producing, and he's got a whole host of the usual musicians: Klaus, Nicky Hopkins, Alan White, Jim Keltner, Jim Gordon, 3 drummers on this. Anyway. The year ends where he moves to New York, partly because they're chasing down Tony Cox to try and get Kyoko back, Yoko's daughter, and very much wanted to be this kind of family that maybe that he's seeing that Paul has got, even. Before they went to New York, they have Julian over to Ascot, for a time. He's spending his school holidays with them at Ascot. Anyway, they go to America. They get jumped on by all these left-wing activists and get pulled to this cause and that cause, and some good causes, some very ill-advised, but. Well, I'm going with my first is 1971. John Lennon records not 1, not 2, but 3 anthems. Okay, so it starts off in March with "Power to the People." Okay, not a brilliant song, but it's still that sort of it's that political anthem. In the UK, it got to number 6. In America, it got to number 10. So it was a big hit. Record World called it a fantastic choral song that rocks. But he later disses it. He was embarrassing and written in a state of being asleep and wanting to be loved by Tariq Ali and his ilk. So he kind of, he realized it's a little bit trite. But it was a big hit. It was a top 10 in Canada, Germany, Ireland, Netherlands, Norway, Switzerland, US, and UK. So it did very well. It did very well for him. The second anthem, obviously, Imagine. Absolutely massive. Recorded in May, released in the US, got to number 3 on Billboard. It got to number 6 in the UK when it was released in 1975 to promote Shaved Fish, and of course, it got to number 1 in 1980 after John died. But so many accolades for this song. The RIAA in 1999 it said it was the number 30 song of the century. The UK the Guinness Book of Hit Singles said it was the number. They did a survey. It came out as the number 2 British single of all time. That was in 2002. Imagine it's an anthem, and it's it's a much loved song, but critics like to, and even fans like to to disrespect it in several ways. How can a millionaire living in his country pad in Surrey sing Imagine. The thing is, he's singing Imagine it. He's not saying do it. He's not saying give away everything apart from your pants. He's saying, imagine doing it, or imagine no countries, imagine no religion. And our good friend John Blaney himself, he said, he criticised it for being, musically a little bit like a hymn, but yet preaching, imagine no religion. We're gonna have to have a word with Mr. Blaney, I think, when we next speak to him. Yeah, so Imagine, ridiculous #1 in Australia, Canada, Italy, Netherlands #5, Norway #6, South Africa #1, Switzerland #5. Again, massive hit. And then he records his Christmas single towards the end of the year. He's kind of thinking, well, learned the lesson to get a message across. Then he's kind of got to, cover it in sugar or in honey or whatever a little bit, and that's what he does. So Happy Christmas, War is Over is a political song, I suppose. It's it's an anti-war song, and this thing about getting his message across. If he covers it in honey, it's a shame that he didn't really apply that when he came to record Sometime in New York City, because there he's going balls out on that one, isn't he? And Happy Christmas was a big hit. Was released so late in America, 1st of December, that it didn't do as well as it should have done the first year. But then it came out the following year. It was delayed in the UK because of stuff with Northern Songs. I think they were denying Yoko's songwriting credit on it and that sort of thing, which is interesting actually, because when we hear demos of that, she's not actually on it. So I'm not sure what contribution she made to the writing of that. Comes out in 1972. It gets to #4, I think, in the UK. It's a big hit. Got to #2 in 1980 after John died, and it only got to #2 really because Imagine was #1. There's a link between Happy Christmas, War is Over and Ram. Do either of you know what it is?
No.
It's Hugh McCracken. He plays on Ram and he plays on Happy Christmas, War is Over.
Does he?
That is so cool, and I love there's that famous quote when Hugh worked with John for Double Fantasy. He's like, "Oh, if you were just working for Paul, that was just to see how good I wanted to see if you could really play with me."
I was going to guess David Spinoza, another shared guitarist.
Yes, yeah, as well. I like your approach, Tony, with the 3 anthems for John throughout this year. A lot of context with those songs you picked, and 2 of them are so remembered because of after John's passing, between Happy Christmas and Imagine. But it would be so cool to go back and listen to those songs and try to get the feedback for what those songs were at the time. Happy Christmas did okay. He includes both on his only compilation he ever did, Shaved Fish, but they were Imagine the album went to #1 in the UK, I read, but as a single, it didn't go to #1 until after he died, right?
No, yes, that's right, because it like you say, there was a lot of singles on Shaved Fish that hadn't been on albums, like Give Peace a Chance, Cold Turkey, Instant Karma, Power to the People, Imagine. Hadn't been singles in the UK, and in 1975 it was put out as a single. It got to #6 in the UK as a single release to promote Shaved Fish. So just going back to 1980, after John was killed, Starting Over was going down the charts at the time. It kind of went up the week after he died, I think, to #13. Then the next week it was #1. And when Starting Over wasn't #1, then Imagine was #1, and Happy Christmas was #2. And then after that, Woman was #1. So John had never had a #1 in the UK during his lifetime.
No.
And now he was dead. He had 3. He would have been chuffed.
He would have been. And it's always very interesting to look at. I love how you went through the timeline of working with Tariq Ali and all that activism that they were doing. Basically, they were doing that while they were in the UK. So Imagine comes out, and Red Mole and all that stuff, all that activism so even though he did that when they got to New York, he was kind of already on that political activism train. God Save Us and all. He did that God Save Us song. So he was kind of channeling that. And you really wonder, if he never left England, what kind of songwriting approach does he take for his next album? Because a lot of people look at Plastic Ono Band and Imagine as like 2 stellar records, and they are. Where would his career have gone had they not gone to New York to as you mentioned, to go look for Yoko's daughter and get started and get ingrained in New York? it would be so interesting to see what John Lennon's solo career would have been had he stayed in England writing original music.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting what you say there, Andy, because he was on this political platform now. Redmar with Tarek Ali, that's a UK thing. Woman is the figure of the world, is universal, and you've got the two Irish songs. Had he not gone to America, he may not have heard of Angela Davis or John Sinclair. He wouldn't have been caught up in the whole Nixon president. Let's stop Richard Nixon getting back into the White House. He wouldn't have been tied up with that. New York City, the song wouldn't have existed. So right. It's really interesting, a really interesting point of where he would have gone with that
had he not left.
Had he not gone to New York and been in the village, with all these political activists, and not only them being there, but them to have access to him. John, come and do this. John, come and do that. John never said no. He never said no.
He didn't. But
he did eventually. But that time when they first arrived in New York in late 71, he kind of wanted to ingratiate himself.
He did
into Greenwich Village life and with the people that hung out there.
Because it's so interesting when you think about Imagine. It's this kind of very chill, mellow record that's produced so well with Phil Spector. You've seen those clips from Imagine, the documentary. It's very, picturesque England in the countryside. Imagine, Jealous Guy, How, all these, even Give Me Some Truth, and I Don't Want to Be a Soldier, but it's just a whole package of this. You have to picture Imagine. And then all of a sudden, that album drops. They leave England for the last time. And now he just totally goes into like politics mode in New York City on the heels of that album coming out. And it just changes the view, I think, of a lot of people's view of what John Lennon was, like this kind of creative, soulful, retrospective thinking Beatle, Imagine, and all of a sudden, we're going to just go right into New York City and go into politics. It really changes the view.
Prior to this, he flip-flops from, he's such a complex character. There's just so many sides to his coin. I think, when you think about kind of, the experimental albums that he did in 68 and 69, and then Plastic Ono Band, which is a harrowing album where he kind of lays himself bare and in a different way.
Not falls out.
But then Imagine is a very different beast. And I'll come to that when it's my turn next time. Andy, your second shot for George.
Okay, so we've talked about the writing, the success of All Things Must Pass. That kind of gets him through most of the year, and it puts the idea to put a benefit concert together, the first of any kind. But I think he's only able to do that because of the success of All Things Must Pass. His stock is this high. Paul's is down here at the time.
We'll get to that. Okay.
Paul's is down here right now. George's stock in the rock world is like he can do no wrong. Sure, I'm going to put together a charity concert, and he gets everybody in the Beatles kind of world with him. He gets Ringo with him. Bob Dylan, went more on that later. Eric Clapton, Billy Preston, Leon Russell, Klaus, and the guys from Badfinger, Joey Molland, who recently passed away, Pete Ham, and Mike Gibbons. Do a crazy, crazy concert. It was never done before. It was never, ever, ever done before. A benefit concert. Who's done these things?
No one.
Nobody. And here's George Harrison, the quiet Beatle, taking center stage, going, yeah, I'll do a benefit concert. I've just had a triple album. I've got a great single. I've got a lot of confidence. I want to use this success to bring some spotlight and charity on a country that people need some support. I want to use my rock profile and my high profile fame right now to capitalize and help some people out. It's not done before. And a junior Beatle did this. John might have had areas where he dived into this a little bit, but George is like, okay, I'm going to put together this all-star concert. He had done Delaney and Bonnie, and he had been a part of these kind of packages. Now here's George Harrison headlining the whole thing at Madison Square Garden the first Beatle to ever play there. Okay, John did it a year later, puts it all together and puts it out. And this is easily point number 2 for me, why George wins 1971. The humanitarian view, where he was, on a plateau of like, here, I have the clout to produce this. I have enough backing. Paul who? John who? Now we know that John was invited, but not with Yoko. And they scoffed at it.
Yeah.
So
What do you say? What do you want Yoko to do during the show? And he said something like, "Sit in the front row and enjoy it," or something.
Wow.
And with that, he was off.
He was off. But John and George at this point are like neck and neck in terms of like where they're competing for that top tier status. And I don't like it, but Paul is like in the way back right now in terms of like where the public is viewing these. The public are viewing these two guys, high profile Beatles in terms of 1971. George, All Things Must Pass. John releases Imagine in the fall. All this stuff happening at the same time. Now, the Bangladesh concert was in August, so Imagine came out just after this. But neck and neck during this time. And George, as we know, worked on Imagine. And then that was in the summer of 71. And then later, that just a couple of weeks later, organizes the concert for Bangladesh. So John and George were very simpatico here. He's on How Do You Sleep? But then he gets invited to the concert for Bangladesh, and he says, no, Yoko can't come. So it's very interesting that the relationship that these two have during this period to organize of course, George wrote the song Bangladesh, came out the 28th of July of 71. So right before the concert, he issues a standalone single, which did okay. Got to number 10 in the UK and 23 here in America, which it's an okay song. I think point number 2 for George is the concert for Bangladesh and being able to pull that off and getting all these people to do it and getting all these people to participate. Ringo did it. No problem at all. Obviously, Apple is still a big thing here. Alan Klein is helping to put this package together. Everybody who contributed to the concert of Bangladesh did it for free. They didn't ask for any royalties. Bob Dylan was supposed to get 25 cents on every sale of the record, but that only went to Columbia. It didn't go to Bob Dylan. So everybody participated in this project, donated their time. Even when the album was put together for release, that was all done free, gratis. So I think for the humanitarian aspect alone and putting such a stellar concert lineup together for the first time that was ever done, that's an easy bullet point number 2 for why 1971 belongs to George and George alone.
And just to take a cheap shot at Tony, I mean, John just copies this the next year. So to talk about its kind of footprint.
Well, not on the same scale, but it's not only the fact that George has got All Things Must Pass under his belt, but it's also that he's got a massive heart as well, to do this. And and all the artists that took part in it as well. Some of them cancelled dates, didn't they? They cancelled, they were on tour and they cancelled dates so that they could do this concert. And it's obviously the humanitarian aspect of this is difficult to argue against, because you can have you can write the best album in the world, but you can't really weigh that up against saving lives, can you? And without Bangladesh, you don't get Live Aid, you don't get anything, you don't get Geldof knocking on your door saying you're doing this, and
right.
So without that, it started off huge trend that not necessarily, not trend probably the right word, but the foresight that pop stars can use their fame not just to make money for themselves, but they can do good with they can use that fame in a different way.
Well, let me jump in here, because let's all look down to the bottom of our screens below us. What do you see as the title of this video? The Battle of 1971, not the sainthood of 1971. That George's humanitarianism is not on trial here. So Andy, Mr. Nichols, let me ask you, in terms of George's discography, where do you, honest hand on the Bible, rank the Concert for Bangladesh album?
Middle of the road.
I rest my case.
The album, though, not the. I'm talking about the album, the live concert experience, and what that was. To me, outperforms what the album is as a recording. The fact that it was able to happen, the fact that it was done and made, and it all happened very quickly in a matter of weeks. Forget the album. Forget the album as a soundtrack to listen to it. And there was a film too. Forget that. I'm talking about the live concert itself, not the album. I'm not.
Okay, well, I'm talking about the album. So
no, I'm talking about the live concert. The fact that it happened.
You know, the fact that he played. You know, he played the concert during 1971. So it's, you know, the album didn't come out till 1972. So, you know,
good point.
The concert itself is what is up for.
Correct.
For the
not
battle, not the album.
It's not the album. Exactly.
It's the concert, and
it's not the album. It's the concert. It's the event. It's what took together for it to happen. Yes. Am I listening to it all the time? No. Most of the time, I'm only listening to one or two tracks, and those are only George's tracks anyway.
I think Dylan steals the show there.
He does.
What about what's his name? Leon Russell.
Yeah.
Jumping Jack Flash and Youngblood. That's just fantastic.
It is.
That is fantastic.
It is. But yes, it's not on it's not on trial, but it is it is a battle for 1971. And George just took all of his chips and said, "Here you go. Top this."
Yeah. He laid down his arms and became a soldier of love.
So now there's Mr. McCartney just waning in the wings here while all this is happening.
We'll get to wings later.
Waning, you know, he's got Ram. He's in between. John and George are doing this thing. Paul and John are totally at their necks at this point. And here's just Paul hanging in the wings.
Yes, which we'll get to. So
go, buddy. Point number 2.
So first, I'd like to make a concession. You know me, I'm a hot take machine. I like to have controversial, provocative takes. One of my, pet hot takes has been saying that Tug of War is Paul McCartney's first true solo album. My reasons being that, McCartney is just, home recordings. McCartney 2 is credited. I'm sorry. Ram is credited to Paul and Linda. And then you have All Wings, McCartney 2, again, a home recording thing. And then finally Tug of War, the first time he's in the studio with a producer, etc. I retract that. I take all of that back, even though it was cool that Adrian Sinclair agreed with me, or at least didn't want to argue with an annoying kid at the fest. I still am happy to return that cosign and change my mind. Ram is not only McCartney's first true solo album, but I think it's probably his best ever. So let me back up. What makes the Beatles such a special band, and I think a reason that a lot of us love them and generations come back to them time and time again, they were the first main band, obviously first can be a controversial statement, but, taking it for this argument, they were the first main band to see the studio as an instrument. It's not just the composition, it's how things are laid out in your headphones, on the speakers, how everything sounds, how it's mixed. That was the art of the Beatles for their last 4 or 5 albums. And I think that for the Beatles, McCartney obviously is trying to be a collaborative bandmates, dealing with the politics, all the different parties involved, which obviously can be another thing up for debate. But with Ram, he has full creative control. This was one of the very first things I remember learning about Ram is that when they mixed the album in New York, they said, this is an album designed to be listened to on headphones. Every single sound is delicately placed across the soundscape to not just make a rock album, but to make a work of art. And I think that not only started or influenced a whole generation, multiple generations of indie songwriters with psychedelic bends that have, kind of like you alluded to before, so much range that some songs on the album are, orchestrated with 40 musicians, and some are just small ukulele pieces.
Right.
That is not its weakness, that is its strength. So I think that it's for good reason that this album will be laid on his gravestone on that day when he passes. It won't be Band on the Run. It won't be Tug of War. Sorry, Kyle from the past. It will be Ram. And mind you, he did this without any Beatles, with just whoever not whoever he would meet on the street. I'll admit that's an exaggeration, but without really trying to cash in the Beatles card, he made this album in New York, away from home. And again, in one of the most difficult times of his life, after the breakup of the band, questioning who he is as a musician, as a person. So, I mean, I can list some tracks: Backseat of My Car, a beautiful, story song, amazing crescendo climax at the end. Hands Across the Water. This is a cheap shot. Uncle Albert, Cheap Shot. That's our namesake with Hands Across the Water. And also another cheap shot, Three Legs. Sound familiar? And of course, Long-Haired Lady. I just think that he's giving everything on this album. It's kind of almost like his little White Album, the fact that it's very diverse in that sense, that you have some kind of Beach Boys harmonies, some doo-wop, some really stripped down stuff, and some just killer guitar solos by Hugh McCracken, aforementioned. I just think that this is Paul's creative fingerprint. And the last thing I'll say is this: the fact that the critics hated it is my biggest point. Because if they loved it, if it was just more of the same, of the 1971 fodder, rock radio fodder that they were used to, maybe we wouldn't be talking about it today.
Right.
The fact that it was so different, the fact that it took people time, like Tony said, to really come around to, really, I think, is what made it different, is what made it original, and why it made it pure McCartney.
Okay, so I agree with all that 1,001%. The problem with it is that it's a 2025 take. It's a 2025 take, and it's an accurate take, and I agree with you. But if we're talking in terms of 1971, at the time, that take isn't happening. I love the take. It's a spot on accurate. I agree with it 1,001% with every fiber of my being. But in 1971, that wasn't happening.
It's in the bargain bin, and it's in the record store. It's in the bargain bin because it's undeservedly, but
totally undeservedly.
But that was how it was perceived in 71.
Well, if you want, we can use some of the Two Legs Patreon money to go buy a time machine and have this conversation on December 31st, 1971. Then we can say who had the best year. That's not the conversation we're having, right? Like Tony's talking about, imagine how it was perceived after John passed away, right? So we are all taking, different time periods. We're having this conversation now. So I still think we can talk about the year 1971, still contain it to that year, but with some modern day perspective.
Yes, agree on that. I think it's Ram has been that album forever. It's in the last 20 years, people now love it. It's great. You are a guy who have everything you've read about it and heard about it has all been positive in your life, but in mine and Tony's life, not so much. We've seen it change from, oh my God, what is this? I think you've just grown up with it. Everybody thinking it's so great. Am I right or wrong?
I think that if its ungreatness is brought up, it's in the context of people didn't like this, but it's actually amazing.
Right.
But I think that if you had it you know, in your ear or in your eyes, in the case of, you know, reading reviews that, you know, that we've had, you would have more doubts about some of the songs on it, I think. You know, when it was perceived, you know, in 1971, I think you would you wouldn't, you only know about its greatness now from this perspective. But sometimes you can be influenced by what other people are saying about a record.
That works both ways.
It does.
Yeah, and it does what it.
I do think when all is said and done, it will be one of those albums that people, when you talk about Paul McCartney's solo career, this will be one of the top 3 that you hear about. It's going to be Band on the Run. It's going to be Tug of War, and I think the third album is going to be Ram. I definitely agree with that. That when all is said and done, this album will stand the test of time and go, look at what this guy was going through, and look at this creative thing that he just wanted to do with a band and do something totally different that ran the gamut in terms of style and genre and everything, throwing everything but the kitchen sink into it. Songwriting, proper ballads, Long-Haired Lady. You spoke about Long-Haired Lady a few weeks back. Why You Love It. All of that in there. I think that's what Ram will definitely be up on that kind of trio of 3 albums. I you know, Tony, you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And just to, this is war. This is the Battle of 1971. We've agreed on this, right? Important to mention that
it's a friendly war. It's that war where they stop in the middle on Christmas Day and play football and stuff.
maybe that's your war, but I came to play.
All right, okay, go for it.
Andy, so 3 years ago, you and your co-host on Two Legs ranked 101 Paul McCartney songs.
Sure did.
Do you remember which one was number 1?
For me, I sure do.
Backseat of My Car.
Certainly was.
Moving on.
It would be mine as well. But how many other songs from Ram will say in the top 20?
I'll tell you right now.
The reason why I say this is because sometimes when you listen to an album, you know, the whole thing is bigger than the sum of its parts.
Yes, that's the beauty of an album.
When you take it out of context, you know, it's not as good. It's not as good if it's out of context, because, you know, an album is a piece of art and it's supposed to be listened to in its completion.
In its entirety. I had one other song in my top 20 from Ram.
Only one?
Uncle Albert?
Uncle Albert. Dear Boy.
Dear Boy.
That's the first. So, and also I checked the Pure McCartney compilation. The most songs from any like album cycle is 1973.
Yeah.
That has 5, but you have 4 from 1971. I think it was Dear Boy, Another Day, which we haven't even mentioned yet, Uncle Albert, of course, and Backseat of My Car.
All on that. So that's a strong representation for that, for sure.
Okay, so I'm big guns out now with the Imagine album. Now, I was thinking about this, and you know, if you were you know, buying John Lennon albums as they came out in the 70s, which I weren't, but if you were, every time he puts out a new album, you're not really sure, you know, what John you're going to get. Are you going to get, you know, John, the rock and roller John, or the political preacher John, or, you know, John the peacenik, or John, you're going to get vulnerable John, or angry John, or romantic ballad writer John, or John the nasty bastard? You don't know which John you're going to get. But with Imagine, you get them all. You get the lot. You get every type of John on here. And I think that Imagine is a, you know, a strong album in a lot of places. I think that there are 5 10 out of 10 songs on this album. Imagine, Jealous Guy, Give Me Some Truth, How Do You Sleep, and How, I think are 10 out of 10 songs. There are others that are I Don't Want to Be a Soldier, It's So Hard, not so great. Crippled Inside is, you know, it's okay. Sorry, I forgot. It's another one. 6, Oh My Love. Brilliant song. Sorry, I forgot that. So 6 10 out of 10 songs on this album. out of 10 songs, which is not bad, is it? Massive album for John. Number one in Australia, Netherlands, Italy, Japan, Norway, UK, US, and probably too many other countries to mention. I'm just going to leave that there, I think, because 6 10 out of 10 songs. 10 songs in the album, 6 of them are 10 out of 10. For me, How Do You Sleep is the big talking point on this album, and as John said, kind of got, because of the whole John and Paul thing that was going on, it kind of got missed that it was a good song. George is on it as well and delivers a stinging guitar solo. Interestingly, Ringo turned up at the session for this and said, "That's enough, John. Don't do this. Don't do this." When you do that, and when you do that, you get that, right?
Oh God, yeah.
Okay. So
body blow.
You've got the two Beatles there copulating, should we say, on the back cover, and got too many people preaching practices and all that sort of stuff. And you give it to John, then you're going to get it back with bells on, I think. And that's what happened. And the whole thing in the music press, when they're writing letters to each other, but they're there for public consumption. And there's a macabre bit of me that quite likes that battle that they had going back and forth, because if it hadn't been through the music papers, we probably would never have known about it. It probably would have been done in phone calls or whatever. So it's an interesting part of their story.
It certainly is, and I love that back and forth. And I think if you're Paul, and I don't know if Paul's ever heard this, but there is a bootleg recording from John's 30th birthday. They were at a party up in Syracuse, all singing around, and they're all singing "Hands Across the Water." From Ram. I don't know. Have you ever heard that, Tony?
I haven't heard it, but I've heard of it. Yeah,
it's fascinating, and maybe I can drop it in here because I do have it.
Let's play a clip.
And if you're Paul and you're hearing John and his posse sing a song from Ram, that's like the ultimate compliment, because he's like, here's this guy that I'm just taking the piss off and having all this arguments with in the press, and there he is singing my song off of an album that he can't stand.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andy.
But that's what I mean. This is what I'm saying. He's such a complex character.
Yeah.
There's so many sides.
And I love your point that you made, Tony, regarding the album, and that, imagine you've got political John, you've got a balladeer song, you got jealous guy. Imagine that album runs the gamut in terms of the styles and the songs that are on it. And you made that point so good with that.
And all those different characteristics of not just John's songwriting, but John as a bloke, I think. Thing. Anyway, I'm just gonna let that sit there, and you can get on with your third.
Yeah,
point.
That's tough to argue with, Tony. I actually completely agree with you in terms of the 10 out of 10 songs. I've spoken recently about how, in terms of John's whole catalog, Imagine really isn't one of my favorites, and I think it's those non-top 10 songs that kind of weigh it down for me.
Mm-hmm.
But those, like you mentioned, those are just home runs. I wouldn't want to change history and take it out or change the album or what have you, but I can't argue with that. I love those tracks.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with Imagine and Ram, that they feel like there's some sort of continuity on Imagine that isn't there on Ram, but there's something complete and whole about Ram that isn't on Imagine, if you know what I mean. I don't think Ram has got as many weaknesses as
Imagine.
but it doesn't have as many strong songs as Imagine. That's how.
That's a really interesting take.
That's a good point.
And that's a point that's bared out by the fact that when taken out of the context of the album, Andy's only picking 2 songs in his top 20, whereas he would put the Ram album at, number 2 or number 3 or whatever in his list, or even number 1.
Very good point.
On a good
point. All right. Well, awesome point, Tony. For number 3, for my final act of defense here to why George wins 1971, it's continuing the Bangladesh concert a little bit, not the fact that the concert happened, but why George wins 1971. For me, the absolute home run. Yeah, the concert happened, but I think in terms of pop music and rock and everything that happened in the 60s, okay, we're talking 1971. The fact that George Harrison persuaded Bob Dylan to play at this concert is no small feat. And for this reason alone, the fact that George was able to pull Bob Dylan, who up to this point had given up touring, had stopped, had gone off the road. He had done 1 television performance in 1969 with Johnny Cash and was off the radar. He had not done any personal appearance other than the Isle of Wight. I think he did the Isle of Wight too, which George and John went to go see also in 69. That was it. George and Bob had this friendship that started in the 60s, evolved. They wrote I'd Have You Anytime, which kicks off All Things Must Pass.
Such a beautiful song.
That the blossoming of that friendship really starts to take hold, I think, during this period. And what a big name to get on a concert bill to have Bob Dylan perform. And George, as we famously know, didn't even know if Bob was going to show up on the day of the concert. And this is so typical of Bob, even to this day, even when he does his live tours now. And I just saw him a year ago. Show's over, he leaves. No goodbye, no interaction. Like, you never know with Bob Dylan. He's such a wild card. And here's Bob in 1971. He had just put out his Greatest Hits Volume 2. So there's a couple tracks that were on there. And like Bob is still very much in the consciousness of pop music, but as a live performer, not on anybody's radar. And here's a Beatle now pulling him in and saying, look, I need you to play this show with me. Okay, I've never done this before by myself. And Bob's like, you're a Beatle. And George is like, well, you're a solo star. You can handle this. I just need you to come in here. Yeah, you're Bob Dylan. I need you to come on here and help me with this show. You're other than me, you're the biggest draw on this bill. And I've got you. I've got to have you on this show. You've got to do this concert with me to help pull people in. And the fact that George got Bob Dylan and he didn't even know until the last minute if he was going to show up and play.
Yeah, I think even when he announces, I want to bring on a friend of mine and yours, or your friend of mine, Mr. Bob Dylan, he didn't even know if he was going to come out.
Didn't even know if he was going to come out. And he came out, and they do Love Minus Zero, No Limit. Oh, it's so great. And here, it's so good. And I think to pull such a big icon who had been off the radar in terms of live performance anywhere, the power of a Beatle, the power and the influence of a Beatle says, okay, I'll come on and do your show and help you out. No problem.
Let me ask you this. Do you know if there's continuity between when Dylan played on Concert for Bangladesh to when he toured with the band a couple years later? Like, do you know if that kind of got him reinterested in that? I'm not sure.
I don't know if it did or not. I mean, maybe Bangladesh ignites that spark, doing live shows again. I don't know.
You're welcome. But just gave you that one.
Thank you. It could, but it's very interesting. Bob does this with George. And as we know from the 1-to-1 film, John's very keen to get Bob to go out on some proposed tour in 72. If you watched 1-to-1, is Dylan going to play? Is he going to join us? Like, George got him. Now John wants to get him. You see what I'm saying? So
wasn't there? There was an issue with Clapton as well, wasn't there? Because didn't did someone have to? He refused to go on unless someone went and got him some smack or something like that.
Yeah, there was exactly. And then Eric was still right, coked out of his mind at this point in time. But yeah.
So Andy, I love your point. This is a very creative point. Obviously, 71, not a ton to work with George. I mean, obviously the concert is huge, and you made a great point about All Things Must Pass still riding high. If you want to award the winner of the Battle of 1971 to Bob Dylan, I will not protest. But unless we do that, Tony and I will just continue having our own conversation.
Hey, it goes hand in hand, buddy. There, Kyle, hand on the run. It's George and Bob together. It's George and Bob together.
That is a pretty crazy matchup.
I've just thought we do have another crossover actually, because Joey Moland, who played on Concert Bangladesh, also plays on Imagine.
That's right. Yeah. Another crossover as well. Yeah. So that's my third and final point. Viewers, commenters, tell us how you see it. That's my take for my 3 points for George Harrison in 1971. I'll leave it there.
All right, back over into my corner, round 3. So, dear listener, you can stop screaming at your telephone, your smartphone, whatever your listening device is. Yes, Paul also formed a little band called Wings in 1971. The ace up the sleeve. So again, just some background here that I'm sure many of our listeners already know. Denny Sywell plays on Ram. Paul tries to kind of form his little Ram band with Hugh McCracken into something bigger. Doesn't exactly work out, but he knows Denny Lane from the Moody Blues days and gets him in as the lead guitarist. And that first iteration of Wings, just Denny, and Linda, I feel like is just a very quintessentialized, embryonic form of Wings, that it really got everything started. So think of the year 1971 like this. The 1971 was a year that lasted a decade. This partnership between Denny Lane, Linda, and Paul that all got started with just, being inspired by Dylan, trying to do things in one take, which a little bit of myth, a little bit of fact there, not always the case, really kickstarted, set the theme for the rest of the 1970s. Those harmonies are what people like Tony that were growing up in that time would be the sound of the radio. Anything that's made by Paul had Paul, Linda, and Denny on it. So Wildlife, is it one of Paul McCartney's greatest albums? I love it. Some people might rank it to the closer to the top, but all things considered, it's not one of his finest works, depending on what you love about Paul. But I think what's so special about this time is that this is a time when he's finding himself. He's trying to chart his new creative direction, and he sets the foundation of Wings with these 3 talented musicians that will, he'll just build on, change throughout, the next decade. And also, not to mention, in terms of him trying all sorts of things, he's also starting the recording sessions for Thrillington, another thing that he'll come back to time and time again with pure orchestral works. So 1971 not only looms large in the history of music with the massive success, perhaps delayed, of Ram, and also the massive success and the foundation of Wings, but this looms large over Paul's whole life, of him working with, Linda until her passing, Denny even a little bit into Tug of War, if I'm not mistaken. And Thrillington, that he does this types of works for a long time. So I think that who won the Battle of 1971, think about it like this. Not just who had the best music, not just who gave the most money and resources to starving children in Bangladesh, but who got the most out of 1971? Who took that towel and just squeezed it dry and just let, the riches rain out for, years and years to come? His name is James Paul McCartney.
Yeah, but you don't get gold discs for dry towels.
No.
Pardon the metaphor there, but so I mean, how can you argue with that? He started Wings in 1971. Even if the first attempt at it wasn't the best one, it's a really time where he's trying everything, and it's a very productive year for him.
No argument here. Go ahead, Tony.
Like a closing statement.
It is. It's the legacy.
It is a closing statement.
It's a great one, and you made a good point there, buddy. It's what he ends the year with, starting a new band that takes him for the rest of the next decade. So while it didn't begin great, what happened at the end of 71 basically sets his next 10 years up.
Yeah, and also I didn't really know about how Wildlife was perceived when I got into it. It was one of the first albums that I listened to by Paul, and I was obsessed with it. I mean, Tomorrow, I love Bip Bop, Dear Friend. I mean, gosh, the harmonies on Some People Never Know. And then especially when you dig into the deluxe box sets, it's amazing. That's why I called it like embryonic Wings. Just, it's not going to be high. It's not going to be with a little luck. It's I Am Your Singer.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of beauty there. And so
and Dear Boy, which kind of put an end to the feud.
You mean Dear Friend? Dear
Friend. Yeah.
You're looking at me like, what's he talking about? And quite rightly so. Dear Friend. It's what I meant.
Well, if we're talking about this little war between John and Paul, and just to footnote it and put it to bed, it is worth noting that by the end of the year, they actually did get together in New York and said, let's have a truce here. Let's stop trading these barbs. And they got together in New York and just called a truce. So all this stuff that happened in 71 that we've talked about today, by the end of that year, the two of them, the two guys that started the band, that started together as musical soulmates, said, okay, enough of that. Let's just call a truce. Enough of this. And it really was the end of it. Really. That was the end of all this stuff, really, which was cool. Not widely reported, but they did get together and just said, okay, enough of that. So, and moving forward, Paul went on to Wings with great success. John did his thing in New York City. George rode the success of All Things Must Pass, and then really spent most of 72 mixing and getting Bangladesh released and recording his next album. And Ringo kind of just was in between all of that, working with George and other musicians around the same time. So, Tony.
Yes.
Last one.
Take it, Tony.
There you go. There's a wildlife. Finally. Take it, Tony.
Wildlife reference. Okay, so I haven't got much from my third point, but you know, when you've got Imagine under your belt, you don't really need it. 2 million copies in the US alone. There you go, in 1971. But I'm just going to end with, a flavour of John going forward into 1972. 10th of December, 1971, he plays the John Sinclair Rally at Ann Arbor in Michigan.
Ann Arbor.
Arbor in Michigan. And, he can't, the tickets go on sale. They sell out in 3 hours, which is a record for a concert in Michigan. He goes on at 3 in the morning. 3 in the morning. He plays 4 songs: Sisters, Oh Sisters, Attica State, Luck of the Irish, and John Sinclair, and then he buggers off. But the whole thing, about this was to try and get the young people to he says this thing, apathy isn't it, and he wants to rile up the young people. But 2 days after the concert, John Sinclair's been banged up for 10 years for trying to give 2 joints to an undercover policewoman. He gets 10 years for that, which is just ridiculous. It is ridiculous. 2 days after this concert, he's out and he's back with his family. And that is a nice way for John to end and win 1971, I think.
Ooh, he got John Sinclair off for the 2 joints. Good one.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little thing, but it goes a long way.
That is a big year for John. That is a big, I mean, kind of like you said, to start living in England, making Imagine, and ending living in New York, getting this guy out of jail.
Yeah.
That's a crazy year.
It's a big year. It's a big year. It's a big year for all of them, and that's why we're talking about it.
If I can sneak in one little quick extra point just to bolster my case here, okay?
You can use it.
Apple Studios reopened right after John left for England. They had revamped the whole studio, and George was the only one present for its reopening. And he said, I just wish Paul would use the studio if he wants to. It's silly not to. We all own the business, and it's doing well. And I'd like all 4 of us to enjoy it now. So there's George speaking on behalf of all the Beatles saying, hey, man, we started this. Let's all use it, too. So,
Well, he used it in Wildlife a little bit.
A little bit, but the new one, again, a little bit, but he didn't. He kind of walked away from it. I'm just going to say there's George kind of just playing peacemaker while John and George are having all their fighting. George is just sitting back going, come on, guys. We built this. Let's just use it.
So we'll let Andy get the last word since he's last place, and we'll let the...
Yeah, according to you. I won this whole thing. And the comments are going to tell it.
That's exactly where I'm going, my friend. Dear listeners, please weigh in here. You let us know who you think is the winner of the Battle of 1971. Did our arguments influence you? Did our arguments, not influence you? Tell us all of your thoughts in the comments. We make an effort to respond to everybody. Our favorite part of this podcast is to engage with the listeners and hear your thoughts. So tell us your experience. First time listening to Ram, 10,000th time listening to Ram, for all these albums. Insert the blank there. Now, before we sign off, a couple of quick things. A reminder, Hands Across the Water podcast on Instagram. Archival clips of the podcast, song suggestions, lots of good stuff. Subscribe if you're not already. What are you doing if you're not subscribed? And we will have our own live streams here on the Hands Across the Water YouTube channel. We are aiming to do those once a month. So it's another great chance for us to interact with you, let your voices, your opinions, your experiences be heard. So, and if you prefer Spotify, if you weren't already aware, we said this at the beginning of the show, our show is also on Spotify. So Andy, what are you up to? What's Two Legs doing these days?
Two Legs will have new content this month of May. Stay tuned. Every Saturday, there'll be a new show on our channel that I do with Tom Hunyadi. So stay tuned for some Two Legs content as well. And Sunday lives on Under Two Legs, which I'll do on there. And we'll do live here on Hands Across the Water too. So good stuff coming down the pike.
Wonderful. Yes. Always great stuff from the Two Legs channel. And Beatly Tone, what's new with you?
Well, I'll have some new content out next week. I'm not sure which day, but it will be next week. And also need to sort of pick up my live stream activities as well. So hopefully be doing that another live stream quite soon, because the last one was mad. There was like 106 people on it at one point.
It was a lot of fun.
Yes. So it was it was good fun. But yes, so plenty to come from me soon.
Excellent.
Good.
Take it home, Kyle.
I myself am looking forward to it. On behalf of all of us here at Hands Across the Water, thanks for listening. Thanks for engaging. Thanks for loving the music. And have a great week. We'll see you next week.
See you guys.
See ya.
Bye.